This is outstanding.
I don't think anyone really knows the details on the Knowles case yet. It's still coming out. It's probably wrapped in a lot of legalese that, and court filings that'll come out over the next few weeks and months. There's a few things happening here. One, there's a general skepticism on the right of these large institutions because there's been so many small instances, not just of banks, but other institutions of things like this, where there's no really benefit of the doubt given anymore, because it does seem that the mistakes always seem to happen more to those on the right. And these kinds of mistakes don't happen nearly as much on the left. That could be partially a perception bias and the kinds of media that, we consume. And there's something probably maybe to that, but it seems to always target one side. And the other side of this is, I don't think this has been widely known at all, is that the Biden administration was really pressuring different institutions, including banks, to clamp down on conservatives in some cases. And so there's some reporting, for instance, that the Biden administration circulated to banks a list of hate groups that they should, reconsider doing business with. And to get a letter, as a financial institution, to get a letter from the federal government is no small thing, warning you. I mean, it maybe doesn't immediately come with consequences, but you can't ignore that. And some of the hate groups, are things you might say, okay, well, yeah, it's like the KKK or something, but they also lump in there a lot of groups that are like Liberty, Justice Council, or groups like our Family Research Council. And it's kind of laughable, honestly, to be lumped in with some of these hate groups. It's not new, but it's laughable. And so I don't really buy that, all the big bankers are conspiring to like shut down the conservative movement in America. But when you put down when you combine the pressure from the Biden administration and the federal government, some of the language that was put in to how you should consider, and I hope you can explain this, how reputational risk was included as a factor that banks should consider. And so they almost had a legal obligation to consider not doing business with people that are considered, controversial. Can you talk about that federal pressure that maybe would push an otherwise neutral bank to maybe make a decision like this, or a payment processor or whoever?
I think it's important to point out that the press is largely focused on one side where it has been discriminatory against people like us that have a certain religious or political belief system. But the reputational risk thing, I was a managing director at Morgan Stanley, which was one of the largest investment banks in the country. And there was an individual who had $30 million account at Morgan Stanley who was very left-leaning, and he had been arrested, and there had been fraud and tax charges, and there was he was involved in some sexual issues, and Morgan Stanley demanded his accounts be closed. But that didn't make the press, and it certainly didn't get covered in conservative media. But there was a reputational risk thing in that case that I realized, okay, that this can get applied both directions. The issue, though, to me, when you bring, if the Biden administration was circulating something saying, be careful with some of these hate groups or violent groups or militia groups, if I ran a bank, I wouldn't want to have an account for the KKK.
Right.
But you highlighted what the real problem is not in saying, please don't bank the KKK. It was considering Family Research Council as part of the same element. I mean, the Southern Poverty Law Center has done the same thing to me personally, to Family Research Council, to other groups that in no reasonable universe belongs in that same classification. And so I don't think anyone on the right is trying to take away the ability of businesses to avoid reputational risk, to avoid the right of First Amendment discernment of who they want to work with. But we are trying to seek out an honesty about what the process is, and then who are you including in things of reputational risk? Someone who's been arrested and is in the newspaper for felony and white-collar crime or sexual crime or something like that. JP Morgan, because they kept accounts for Jeffrey Epstein when he was not even referring to all the issues that ended up coming out later, but because over the years they had a banking relationship with them, which I believe actually was part of their legacy relationship with Bear Stearns. You recall JP Morgan bought Bear Stearns during the financial crisis. They have now been sued for tens of millions of dollars for having a relationship with this controversial figure. I get why banks don't want relationships with headaches, controversial figures, moral, legal dilemmas. What I don't get is including free Americans that have certain viewpoints as being included in that. And so we all do well in this issue to insist on honesty. A lot of Christians hurt the cause here by claiming victimhood of debanking when they were refusing to do paperwork. It happened systemically because it came across my desk. We have to be honest about where they're debanking allegations, and most certainly these institutions that, as you point out, have lost a lot of credibility. They need to adjudicate these issues with far more transparency and fairness. And I would argue they have a burden to represent these others fairly, not try to claim that they believe Family Research Council belongs in the same list as the KKK. Those things are really undermining of public trust.